We're not likely to end the Fed next week by any law being passed, but the Fed will be ended like so much else will end in this country. It will end by default, because the laws of economics tell us that you can't perpetually defraud the currency, print the paper, it eventually self-destructs, and something else will have to be done. And that will be an opportunity for us, because then is the time for us to know what we believe in and to rebuild this country on these sound principles that we were so fortunate to have at the beginning. Those principles gave us the greatest amount of freedom and the greatest amount of prosperity in the history of mankind. But for quite a few years, and it's probably close to 100 years, there's been a steady erosion of those liberties and a steady erosion of our wealth. So when this comes, the bankruptcy will have to be declared. The reason we're in such a mess in Washington, nothing happens, in a way that's good, because they're starting to recognize that they can't spend perpetually. They don't know that yet. They're still arguing how to spend the money. They haven't yet heard our message that the end is here, that we have to quit. A lot of people just wonder how this will come about and how it will end. I think it will end not so much that we will end up with the right number of people in Congress and will pass better legislation. It will end with a failure of the state, the failure of the government. And we do talk a lot about secession and interposition and nullification, and these are worthy subjects to talk about. But I think when the bankruptcy comes, when the money fails, and when government fails, and we're in the midst of the failure of government, when it becomes evident, the federal government will become very much less relevant, because they can't buy everybody and say, we will give you this, and if you don't do what we tell you, we're going to take it away. They won't have the wherewithal to bribe the people and hold the people in check. The big problem, of course, is they will still have a lot of guns. And the founders were quite accurate when they talked about the reason for the Second Amendment, and it wasn't for rabbit hunting. My goal has always been to make sure we do everything conceivable to prevent that from coming. And that is why I do talk a whole lot about, the peaceful means and the intellectual means of confronting bad ideas. To me, the only solution to combat what is happening today is for our views to prevail. Governments usually reflect the prevailing attitudes of the people. So when the attitude of the people is that they accept, because they have been brainwashed with Keynesian economics, and they have accepted the idea that governments just have stuff and they can pass it out, they support the government. But once it becomes known that the government cannot provide any longer and that the money fails, that the people then will have a much greater say in what's happening. Then the government will reflect what the people believe. A good example of how this works is actually on how the Fed bill operated and worked out. They never were convinced that the Fed needed auditing. They weren't persuaded by my arguments. I've been arguing for 30 years and I couldn't get them to listen. But they're listening to the people because that message got out, the economic crisis hit. They heard about the TARP funds and the corruption, and all of a sudden a few of us got the information out. Do you know what? If you think the TARP fund corruption is bad, you ought to find out what the Fed has been doing. And with the support of people like you at the grassroots who went to the members of Congress and many senators and got their attention. So it does work, and we have to believe in that. Otherwise, we will usher in too much, violence that we don't need. But ideas do have consequences. Right ideas are what is necessary. You know, they complain so much now about Washington is not bipartisan enough. All we need to do is be bipartisan and work these problems out. But they never talk about what the bipartisans are going to do. Of course, they're always talking, they're always inferring those who want bipartisanship is to increase the size of government and more spending and just to agree with it. Of I think we've had way too much bipartisanship. Just think of how much happens to our country, and it doesn't happen because of one party. The bipartisanship has been overwhelming when it endorses Keynesian economics, and that's been around since the Depression. The Keynesian economic system, likes the Federal Reserve. They like inflation. They like spending. They like deficits. And if you get into trouble, they like spending. They like deficits, and they like inflating. And they think they can do it forever. But that's ingrained in the system, and it's been a bipartisan cooperation that has done that. What is nonpartisan or one party about our foreign policy? Only at the time of elections you hear a little bit of dissent. Like in the year 2000, the Republican Party candidate was arguing that, we want a humble foreign policy. We don't want to be in nation building. We don't want to be the policeman of the world. And that helped them get elected. Yeah, and look what has happened. Then along comes the last election, and the candidate that won and the person in the office today, he said, we're going to bring peace to the area. And he was the peace candidate. And what has he done? Well, we've expanded the war, sent more troops into Afghanistan. We started bombing Yemen, and we bomb Pakistan continuously. And quite frankly, I don't believe the troops are yet to come home from Iraq, because the policies haven't changed. They've been bipartisan. They're supported by both parties. They support the monetary system. They support the Federal Reserve. You would think maybe one party might take a position that we shouldn't have the federal government running our educational system. Remember, not too many years ago, that was actually in the Republican platform to get rid of the Department of Education. And yet, last Republican administration doubled the size of the Department of Education. Is there any wonder that people get cynical and upset and angry at what's happening from Washington? Because on occasion, the people are starting to think they lied to us in Washington. No, but the system has been bipartisan, but it's bipartisan because the prevailing attitude of the people around the country have been educated by the same groups of people. Now, what's happening today is there's a new education going on. It's not always in the university. Sometimes it is. But there is something going on because you can get your information so much faster and more accurate if you sort it out all the time. And the availability of the internet. I was just really shocked during the last, in the campaign, where attending at the University of Michigan, people there knew. Do them, because when the subject of money came up, they said, and the Fed, and they said it very loud. So I won't bring that name up again. But I will suggest that on occasion, talking to an audience like this, I've always been impressed when students and others recognize that there is a school of thought called the Austrian School of Economics.